Hey, Brendan.
Hey, Joe.
What time of year is it?
It's Halloween time.
It's time for spooky stuff, you know? We got spooky movies, we got spooky video games, we even got spooky books. But you know what people never talk about?
Spooky music.
Legitimately, I feel like no one talks about albums that are, like, spooky or Halloween themed. It just kind of never comes up, and I think part of that might just be because it's hard to scare someone with, like, just music. So for Halloween, we're gonna figure out what the spookiest album is.
Of the very short selection, very small selection that we've selected.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look, we don't have enough time to listen to, like, every album that could be considered scary, so, like, four's the best we can do.
Dead Man's Party by Oingo Boingo.
Yeah, Oingo Boingo. They're like a weird new wave-y band. I don't know. They have a very interesting style that I wouldn't really describe as new wave.
It's very 80s.
It is very 80s. This is, I would say, the party album of the ones we've selected. This is the album that you could throw on at, like, a group gathering or something, and it would be a fun time. It's really fun. It's not, like, scary. It doesn't have, like, an oppressive atmosphere. It has the same vibe as, like, spooky, scary skeletons, basically. Most of the songs are really fun. They kind of have, like, a Halloween element to them. It's not trying to scare you. It's trying to have fun.
If I was doing, like, an 80s themed Halloween party, this album is, like, perfect for that. But yeah, the lyrics, they have, like, some spooky elements to them. They talk about, like, skeletons and dead people and stuff. But they never really go into any sort of deeper horror than that.
Yeah, this is, like, surface level, kind of like they're skeletons and they're coming to life horror. Like, it's kind of like campy horror, but without, it's not, like, extreme camp.
Oingo Boingo, fun spooky.
There's a lot of, like, interesting instruments they use. There's, like, a xylophone on the first track that sounds like bones. It's very it's kind of bones. A lot of the tracks are very, like, I'd say pretty groovy a lot of the time, and, like, yeah, how do I describe them? They're very groovy, but also they kind of have, like, a bounce to them a lot of the time, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely, like, dance music.
Yeah. Overall, I'd say this album, it's kind of spooky, you know? It gets you in the vibe, in this Halloween vibe, but it's not, I'm not shitting my pants or anything.
Oh, that's how we're rating these albums? How likely we are to shit our pants?
No. That's not really what I meant, but, like, you know, that's how it goes.
That's how it goes. Next up on the spooky list is Evelyn by Evelyn, their self-titled album.
Yeah, this album's a collaboration between the person from the Dresden Dolls, who I forget the name. Amanda Palmer, and some other guy who I don't know.
I know, that's so right. That's so right, though. I have no idea who the other dude is. It's like Joshua Webley or something like that, and I have no idea what he does. I just know he's on this album. I'm here for Amanda Palmer.
So basically, summary of the album, it is a concept album about conjoined twins, and it's just like you learn about their life as they go through life.
Pretty much. It's as they're growing up. It deals with some pretty heavy themes. Like, these girls, they are born, and then 4 people just fucking die around them.
So I have to say, this album is very weird, because on the one hand, you have the tragic events of September songs, or, like, story songs, essentially, where they tell, like, the life story of these twins. They're also contrasted with, like, circus music at points because they were in a circus.
There's this one song that's like a ragtime song, and doesn't really have much to do with the album, but like it's a good song, I guess. The biggest thing that takes away from the spookiness and eeriness of this album is probably just the tonal inconsistency of it all.
Yeah, just because of how it goes in between styles. And I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing for the album, but in terms of spookiness, it's definitely not as spooky. The tracks that are the tragic events tracks have like this very like depressing kind of like creepy music in the background.
Yeah, and the way that they deliver the story on these tracks is very like emotionless and deadpan, which I think really helps to accentuate the eeriness of it all. It's kind of like a narrator.
But then you have a campaign of shock and awe, which is just, it just has circus music going on. and there's like also like you have songs at the end like MySpace, which is like a new wave song kind of, and also Love Will Tear Us Apart, which is a Joy Division cover.
It's a Joy Division cover. I actually really like this cover. Again, like it's a really weird tone coming after MySpace, which is this new wave, almost like arena rock style song. And then you have Love Will Tear Us Apart, which is it's much more solitary sounding. It feels lonely in a way.
Oh yeah, definitely. Within the album, that definitely reflects kind of the tone at that point and where the twins are like emotionally. As far as the album's spookiness, it's very inconsistent. Because you got the tragic events tracks, which are just like, they have this oppressive atmosphere, they're pretty spooky, but then also circus music. So, very inconsistent. Maybe listen to the tragic events tracks for the spookiness, and leave out the others.
Yeah, you said it. That's probably this album's biggest shortcoming when it comes to its spookiness, is just how inconsistent it can be. And the next spooky album, John Congleton and the Nighty Nights, Until the Horror Goes.
This album is so aggressive in horror, especially the opener is maybe the most intense song on the album. You have these like super like aggressive synths, and John's vocals are just so like unhinged, not only on this track but like throughout the album. They're just he's going. He's unhinged. He wants to kill people, I think.
As with a lot of John Congleton's music, there's a couple ways to interpret it. The way I interpret it, it's kind of heartwarming at the end of the day. It's about how life is a lot nicer to go through with somebody at your side. That's somebody usually being, in this case, he specifically says a wife. It's like, it's kind of heartwarming when you think about it, but also there's so many like quotable lines off this album that just have so much spook to them.
This is like the Shining of the albums we're talking about.
Exactly.
Where like the album feels like someone's going insane and like snapping a lot of the time. Just in terms of like how unstable John's vocals sound. Which, I mean, that's present through like all his music, but
his delivery throughout the entire project is it just sounds like something's off, and that is complemented very well by these very noisy backgrounds and sometimes discordant melodies that's also surrounding him, which I think is really good. There are times where like this is like a noise rock album, which usually it's pretty light on the noise and more into the rock side of things, but there are times where it starts dipping into some very noisy sounds, and it's like it really helps to accentuate what's going on, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I will say there's maybe some times where it gets like a little bit calmer, and I wish it kept the energy up with the instrumentation, but definitely John's vocals, they be carrying for the spookiness.
In the final stop on this spooky train, we've come to Clipping's brand new album, Visions of Bodies Being Burned.
Yeah, so Clipping, fairly well-known underground like noise rap act. They last year came out with
There Existed an Addiction to Blood.
Yes, which was a great album. It's essentially a horrorcore album.
Yeah, it had a lot of gothic horror themes running throughout.
But it was very noisy in the way that clipping usually is. And this is essentially a follow-up to that. And this album, man, this album's incredibly catchy, but also still has this like oppressive noise to it that I love about clipping. Most of the rapping on it has like this coldness to it that I think works perfectly for this subject matter, which is, you know, all surrounding various like horror genres and ideas. Like you have the track 69 Nerve Camp Bell, which is essentially like the story of like a slasher movie, except the final girl who's alive is not like helpless or anything. She's like hunting down the murderer.
And they do this thing where they tend to reference like horror movies. I interpreted 96 Nerve Camp Bell as being kind of a reference to the movie Scream. Spoilers for Scream, I guess.
For the track Eaten Alive, my only notes are just snack time. There's like a lot of like cannibalistic elements, especially towards the back half of the album, looking like meat, which I love. It features Horror, or HO9909, which I think works really well because it's just, that song is like exactly in their like wheelhouse, and they work beautifully on that track. And you got Eaten Alive, which, take a guess at what that song's about. But yeah, and like everything just has this super noisy, oppressive production over it that it just adds to like this like horror feeling. I love how clipping like creates this atmosphere with their records, and especially this record. There's
this constant themes of death, it seems, throughout the entire record, and that culminates in the final track, Secret Peace, which contains field recordings from the site of Black Dahlia's death. An interesting murder case, apparently.
I'd say this album is really fucking spooky, I must say.
It's pretty spooky. The way they bring these classic horror themes into the modern day and present them on this album is quite terrifying.
This album, I'm just recommending it on its own too. Like this album, I'm recommending most of these albums on their own. I'd actually think most of them are pretty good, but especially the clipping album is like, it's fantastic and also very spooky. Brendan, which of these albums would you say is the spookiest of them all? The biggest spook?
The biggest spook? I had a little bit of trouble on this one. I went back and forth between the John Congleton and the Nighty album with just how unhinged and crazy that album is, and the clipping album with its continuous themes of gothic horror and death and true fear that's presented on that album. And at the end of the day, I think the more Halloween spirit album is the clipping album, Visions of Bodies Being Burned. I'm gonna go with the Visions of Bodies Being Burned, spookiest Halloween album.
I have to agree with the clipping album. The way it uses these horror tropes and like puts them into this super interesting like rap album, I think just works fantastically. And while the John Congleton album is very unhinged sounding, I think the like coldness that the clipping album brings leads it to feeling like more eerie, especially the conclusion of the album. So yeah, clipping album, Visions of Bodies Being Burned, the spookiest album by far. It's unquestioned. There's no albums that are spookier. None. Zero. We listened to all of them.
All of them. All four.
Please leave in the comments how we missed your favorite Halloween album. Hey everyone, if you enjoyed that video, please consider giving it a like. Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and also consider subscribing to our channel. Yeah, I hope you have a wonderful day.